Hi guys, you're listening to the AussieDevs podcast, episode 13, where we discuss the game dev scene in Australia. My name's Eric and I've got my co-host Glenn Turner with me, and on today's episode, we've got an interview with fellow Perth developer Daniel Burke, and we'll just find out how he's going with his current project, Innkeep. Without further ado, here's the interview.
You're a Perth-based developer, hey Daniel?
Yeah, I am. That's right.
Yeah, a lot of the developers we've talked to have been from Perth. You know, we're originally from Perth as well, and just talking to people in our local state that are doing some good stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing to see like how many people are in the state doing really cool things, and that's the cool thing about Twitter, I guess, and social media, that you can actually see what they're doing and you can talk to them and can actually kind of have that connection, even if you're living, hundreds of kilometers apart, which WA is more likely than not, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't think there's a lot of game devs in WA. It's a little bit backwards, I suppose you could say, in some aspects. But we've met a lot of people who are doing game dev in WA, and it's really good to see.
And sometimes in surprising places where you'll find them as well. Like Ben, I think who's doing amazing artwork for adventure games, is out even further in Whoop Whoop than where I'm from. He's out on Great Eastern Highway, which is where I'm from as well. But I was in Denmark, and he's further out east of Esperance or somewhere.
Oh, Esperance.
He really is. He just sends photos of him and his dog out there, and it's just the horizon and not a building in sight. And, he makes art for adventure games. It's like, wow, that's...
Esperance is pretty awesome.
It's an awesome place to get a lot of inspiration, and you don't have a lot of distractions from other people as well. I guess that you get that with the rural kind of areas. It's kind of like isolated in that sense, so you can focus and work your magic a bit better.
That's not my situation exactly today, but growing up, that's how I got into games, I guess. There was nothing to do. It was just so far to go anywhere. You couldn't just jump on your bike and visit your friends or, really do anything. So until you got a car at 17, you were kind of at the mercy of whether or not your parents wanted to drive you.
Yeah.
Which meant lots of time for books, lots of time for games, lots of time for kind of just thinking up ideas and being, in a way, you get to exercise your imagination maybe more than kids with more stimulation in the cities.
Yeah, that's it.
That's an interesting point, actually.
I've been looking up your website, Daniel, and it's awesome just to read like the Innkeep game blurb and your inspiration and stuff like that. And I've just looked at some of the games that you used to play, the fantasy orientated first person or like third person perspective, like Ultima. You mentioned Ultima 7 a lot. And like Glenn and I, we would have grown up around the same time when those kind of games were really starting to get played a lot. I remember playing Estonia, which was kind of similar. And oh my goodness,
the game that I really remember when I was young, Ultima Underworld. I don't know if you've ever played that.
Yeah,
that was like the first. I think I've talked about it on a different podcast, but it was like the first first-person sort of shooter, fantasy sort of game, and there was character progression, and man, I love that game.
And actually, I'm not sure if you know this or not, but it came out at the same time as Wolfenstein 3D, the actual, which was 2D. Yeah. Wolfenstein 3D as was 2D. But Ultima Underworld is not. Ultima Underworld was the first real 3D first-person perspective game that was ever made.
I legitimately played it not that long ago. There's like this, I can't remember the website, but you can download old games off it. And I downloaded and played it, and I was like, oh, wow, this sucks, like visually, but it's bringing back so much nostalgia.
It's got a great UI. Interesting story. When I was playing Underworld when I was 17 or so, 16, I actually had a little web page. This is the early days of the internet. It's like 1997 or something. And it was devoted just to Ultima news. So I had my little Ultima kind of zine. And I interviewed a few people through somehow. I jumped on ICQ. I'm not sure if you remember ICQ. Yeah. And I found the address for Warren Spector, who worked on Iron Storm, Deus Ex, and everything. And I just just tweeted. Yeah, I just ICQ'd him. I'm like, hey man, like, can I interview for my little zine? And he was very gracious. He was probably a bit annoyed, but he actually answered my questions. But I couldn't respond to him because I was busy playing Underworld. So he's like, yeah, okay. So he just sent me an email and replied. But he said Underworld was his favorite of all the projects he worked on. Of course, at that point, he was probably in the middle of making Deus Ex. So I don't know if he'd say now if that was his favorite or what. But yeah, he seemed to really have a soft spot for it with the team and everyone he put together, who were really amazing.
I don't know if it's because we're probably a bit older than some of the people now, but I will talk about it and people will be like, "What? I've never played that. I've never even heard of the game."
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now I've someone else who I'm talking to who's played it. Good times.
Yeah, I mean, games weren't quite mainstream yet at that point, even to the extent that they were in, say, year 2000 when PCs started to really come into people's houses. Like, 90s, if you were an American nerd growing up or maybe an Australian nerd, you kind of might have had a PC and played these games, but I mean, it really was a different scene. So I'm not surprised. It is kind of always amazing when you meet people who've never even heard of these games. Yeah, so Ultima was a big inspiration for me, definitely.
So, sorry, we haven't really spoken about it, but the game you're currently developing is called It's called Innkeep. Do you want to give us a bit of a spiel about it, mate?
All right. So the idea behind Innkeep, what happened was I spent probably a few weeks trying to hash out something that I wanted to do, where I could make a game that didn't involve lots of levels. So I didn't want to be designing heaps and heaps of kind of level-like content. This is because I don't know if you guys have played Gunpoint by Tom Francis.
No, I haven't actually.
Well, it's an amazing game that's also made in Game Maker, which Innkeep is as well. And
Game Maker.
He's kind of a big inspiration for why I went into finally making this. But what he said, the hardest thing about Gunpoint for him was making all the levels. That content part was very time consuming.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to come up with a concept where I wouldn't need to do that. There'd just be one location. And also, this is 2013, you had Papers, Please, which is, again, an amazing kind of experience but at the same time, you're static. You don't go to here and there and all these other different kind of locations. It's just one location. So I was thinking, what kind of location would allow for novelty of new situations to constantly be encountered without you going anywhere? So in Papers, Please, of course, it's a little check booth where you're going through a border, which is a great spot. You're always going to have people coming through, and you can work in a narrative in that way. But I always wanted to, maybe this is the Ultima influence as well, but all kinds of classic RPGs, you have this setting of the inn or the tavern where people are gathering, right? You get your quests from there. You go there to sleep and rest and to get food, and it's just a really iconic setting that hadn't actually been explored that much at that point. Right about the same time, a whole bunch of other people started working on games set in taverns. So you've got Orcish Tavern, for example. Recently, there's Epic Tavern. There's a couple of Australian devs making games set in taverns. So it's become a genre, like tavern games. But they're simulations mostly. And my game isn't. It's not about management or being a sim. In that sense. It's a little bit more like Papers, Please. It's a setting that's an excuse for some more kind of simplistic actions and challenges where you're trying to gradually go from day to day, as the difficulty ramps up, a bit maybe like Kingdom, which is another amazing little 2D game. Yeah, it's kind of side-scrolling. Kind of city. Okay. So that's the idea. So sorry, I haven't even said what the game is really, but basically you're running a low fantasy inn. So you're the innkeeper, and your character is trying to be a jolly, happy fellow, get everybody to have a good time during the evening. That's kind of what you're doing. But at night, when it gets late and everyone's asleep, you're going to be sneaking into their bedrooms to steal, wiggle the rings off their fingers, take their gold, look in their backpacks. So the adventurers go out and do all the fighting, but you're the person who's maybe going to help yourself to some of what they found down there.
I love that concept. That's hilarious.
It's kind of, you always see it from that sort of, it's like that from the NPC's point of view kind of thing.
Yeah. If you were a player in one of the usual games, you'd stop at an inn or something like that. And then you can walk out and just find out that a whole bunch of stuff has been stolen from you. That's an awesome way to figure.
And then you're scratching your head. You're like, how much did I have to drink last night? And what happened? And they go, you're not too sure. So yeah, there's a few kind of scenarios where that could get you into trouble, and you got to kind of choose who you're going to steal from, and that could lead to narrative choices and things like that. But the core game loop is just about that, enjoying that setting, enjoying the atmosphere of that kind of setting, and just being strategic a little bit about, okay, finding out who's got the money, and trying to make sure they have a good time.
So is it like an endless loop game where you continue and play for sort of the same game forever, or is it like a structured level sort of system with progression?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I might have an endless loop option. Papers, Please does as well, where they've kind of stripped out the narrative elements and just had that core game loop running. And I might do something like that, but the main single player experience would be like a narrative experience.
Oh, it's a simple kind of concept. And I like that how you locked it into. There's so many ways to try and challenge, like overcome the challenge of designing multiple levels, and I think you've got a very nice take on it. So that just that one location, but one location does amazing things if you can think outside of the box and put a lot into it. And it's a good concept that you got there.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Do you find because you are having sort of one level per se that you find yourself really getting caught up on the details of making that level as good as you can make it, if you know what I'm trying to say? Because there isn't one level that you're giving to get to the gamers.
Yes, definitely. That's been a big job. To be honest, if you look at the game as it stands right now, a lot of the features that I had even a year ago, I don't have anymore. And I've gone backwards as far as features are concerned because I've been so busy kind of reworking the look of the main play space. So I started kind of early on just prototyping and making some rough art, just to kind of get an idea of what kind of game it would be and thinking a bit more about it. And at some point I realized that before I went any further, I had to, tear everything up, as it were, and just start all over again so that I could finalize what the shapes were and everything. And that's been really time consuming. Yeah. So you do agonize. You do think, man, how can I just make this little pixel here fit perfectly with that pixel there? And you're kind of tinkering days on end just to make one sprite a little bit better. But because people are going to be looking at it, you also, on the other hand, you don't kind of think it's a waste of time. You think, well, you're going to get your money's worth or your effort's worth out of.
Definitely.
I know it's not out yet, but have you had any of your friends or family test out what you've made so far?
I've had a few people kind of jump on and play around. I get my partner to take a look at what I'm doing. She always thinks it looks great. She's supposed to say that. So I probably try and get most of my feedback just at this stage still from Twitter and stuff like that, really. Although I post a bit on Bay 12 Games, other games forum, which is a great sub forum I'd recommend to anybody interested in games and indie games.
So what is that again, sorry?
Dwarf Fortress's forum is Bay 12. That's the kind of the name that Khan Adams gave to his little company or his little team, him and his brother. So just jump on there and have a look at the forums. There's a great sub forum called Other Games, and that's where people hang around and just talk about all kinds of various interesting games, including stuff that people are working on, and so that's a good spot for getting feedback as well if you're working on a project.
So I think that's the thing we found interviewing a few people now. We're sort of, like I was saying, our third episode. There seems to be a really good sense of community within the game. And like everyone knows how much everyone else is struggling to a lot of solo devs and or duos and that trying to struggle to get everything out. And everyone's happy to sort of help each other and provide, feedback or what worked for them, what didn't.
Yeah. And I think there's a thing with people who make games because they appreciate how much effort can go into making a little thing. They're exactly the kind of people who are going to jump out and say, hey man, good job, that's great. Like if someone who has no idea about game making, you can show them something that could take 200 hours and they'll look at it and just go, what am I seeing here? What's they won't know. But someone who makes games will know. They'll say, wow, you've done this, that, the other. They can really kind of appreciate it. And that's why it's what allows you to kind of get on each other so well.
I think I was reading because I've been following your tweets a fair bit in terms of your progress, and I think it was just the closing and opening of the doors in game, and like you could kind of see how proud you were with that last sort of tweet that you put out of I think I've got it to work, and it's cool. It's really cool. Having a door open and shut doesn't sound very complicated until you think, well,
what if it shuts when you're standing in the door? And how are you going to stop it from shutting when you're in the wrong way? And how are you going to make it, stop you from moving through the door? And when it's open, what way are you going to display the way that it looks when it's open on this angle or that angle? Or there's so many kind of case variables where getting it 80% of the way there only takes you maybe a few hours, but that remaining 20% of weird things and bugs and problems can take you, quite a lot more.
You don't want to kind of... I understand it's like a pixel based game, but you also kind of don't want to lose that immersion as well.
Yeah.
If it sounds silly, but if you're playing a game and the door you walk through a door or something, you're like, oh, well, that's not real. Even though you're playing a pixel game version of you running it in.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You did talk a lot on your website about like Glenn said, the immersion, but also like the flow. You don't want a loading screen or something like that popping up every time you change or hop into someone's room and stuff like that. And I think that was one way to preserve the reality of it.
Yeah, so I think I was talking about that in the context of like the Elder Scrolls. So back in the day of Ultima 7, like you had a seamless world with no loading screens, which they did in Ultima 8. They did in Ultima 9 as well. But somewhere along the way where they transitioned to 3D, that became really difficult for some reason. And we have those games in the past that could do it, and now we're on that edge where some games still think it's okay to have loading screens in the middle, it's weird.
Yeah, it breaks it up too much.
Very 2000 and sort of 5. It was like, I remember like one of the Tony Hawks you used to play, and you'd be skating along, and then all of a sudden it would just like freeze. And you would have a second where it's loading and he's just sort of standing on his board. It's sort of like, or like you'd be mid kickflip or something like that, and then ready to go again.
Yeah.
And like you said, it became the norm that everyone should have loading screens.
Yeah, I mean, I could say a similar thing about NPCs, right? I used to dream about a game where you'd have like a fantasy city, like you'd read in a fantasy novel, one of these amazing cities that the authors depict. And you'd walk down the city and there'd be like 1,000 people in the street with you, right? And it felt like, we could do that, but people always wanted to improve the graphical appeal of the NPCs. Like that was the priority. So you had a game like, for example, Oblivion with this giant, big, amazing city that it's supposed to be, but then on any given street there'd be 3 guys.
Yeah.
That was the extent of what you could handle. Until, just recently, like The Witcher 3, now suddenly the computers are getting powerful enough to finally start keeping up with...
I don't have enough hours of my life to play Witcher 3. That game...
I don't think anyone does.
Oh, man, like I'm pretty sure I played for like a month, just like solid. And then I because I'm the kind of guy when I play those sort of open world games, I just go do whatever. Like I don't necessarily follow a lot of the quests. Things like that, and you end up just like playing for 200 hours. Yeah.
I think that was about the time I quit my last job when Witcher 3 came out. Completely completely coincidentally. Yeah.
But I think, like you sort of said before, people are focusing on graphics. Like you look at all of the marketing strategies and things like that now are about graphics and how many frames and how fast, but then you got games. So Fallout 4 got slammed by people saying that it didn't look that good, and you're like, well, I mean, you got the whole one side of the fence. You've got people saying it's about graphics and how the game looks, and the other side of the fence you've got people saying it's about gameplay and things like that.
Yeah, that's the two parties.
It's kind of, I guess it's also because you now have computer games reaching a broader audience, and you've got people playing on consoles where they've gone and handed over $60, $70, and they know that these companies have the budgets, but they prioritize getting the release out by a certain deadline, and that they want to maximize how much money they're getting, so they're just going to push it out and fix it later with patches. And so I think there's that kind of, if you're an indie developer, there's a very different set of expectations, and that's what I think working in this space means you've got that leeway.
I think the interesting thing you can talk to sort of indie developers about is do you think that indie developers are the ones that will push innovations or push boundaries?
Yeah, I mean, inevitably. I mean, I think it's always been that way. Even before, I mean, you had like a very maybe a really special period when, Bullfrog, for example, or someone like that could, like Ironstorm, they get together and then have a relatively small studio, but you'd still be funded well, and you'd be able to make something that's a bit different, and you'd get the money. Now, I don't think that's really very easy anymore. So you do have to look to indie games. But if you were going back even further, to Origin systems and when that came out, I mean, people were just 2 or 3 person teams. That was what was happening. Yeah. So I suppose we've kind of gone back to that in a way.
Yeah, and I think people are searching. This probably sounds a bit hippie-ish, but the key gamers are sort of searching for what they enjoyed about the games in the first place, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like what attracted them to gaming. It's not not another COD game, or it's not Assassin's Creed 94, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's something that you immerse yourself in. I mean, the game we played recently, me and Eric, which we don't do very often, was from Seven Software.
Yeah, Final Days. That was pretty cool.
Final Days, and we just had it's a simple top-down zombie shooter thing, and then we had a blast playing that. That was probably the best fun I've had playing a game in a while.
I agree with that. Yeah. It's taking it back to the roots.
Like someone's taken some classic idea of a game and they've just kind of perfected it or reimagined it, or they've done something to it, for example, that is possible now that wasn't possible before. Like Shovel Knight, or mean, it's just really cool to see. But yeah, to be honest, every time a Steam sale comes on, right, it's hard to avoid like snatching one of these AAA games for $10 or something.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, because you just want to.
I'm probably going to play Destiny 2, to be honest. I'm going to play Destiny 2.
I might give it a go too once it's on sale. But once you load it up and you jump in there, there's so many times where honestly, 1 hour later, I'm like, I've pretty much seen enough, and I've just turned it off. And these are games that are well regarded, to be honest. I mean, I know I can understand why, because there's a lot of effort that's gone into them, and they look very pretty.
Yeah.
But the games that hold my attention more often than not are indie games. And that's remained the case now for the last 8 years since it started to really pick up. All my favorite games are all indie games. It's just really quite amazing.
Yeah, there's this it's like a secret recipe with indie games. I guess it's when you have big corporations or big teams making games, there's a lot of people that it has to satisfy. So a lot of the cool, unique features get dulled down to a general kind of setting, which makes everyone happy. But with these indie games, a couple of people that have the same kind of idea, they can really focus on the out there-ness, the feature that's not really in anything else, and go with that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and it's kind of similar to what's happening in films, I suppose. You've got this age now of kind of like making movies by way of committee. Which boxes are you going to tick to make sure that you satisfy the maximum number of consumers? And it just becomes really quite bland. Yeah,
and unfortunately, it kind of leads to that money thing. Is like, what's going to make us the most money? Like, how many people are we going to attract doing it this way or that way?
But then on the other hand, it's also funny to see now ideas that first appear in indie games begin to kind of bubble up into AAA.
Yeah.
So you have got that kind of whatever that seems to work and people find popular. Once it's been shown to be popular, then it starts to get adopted. Then it starts to kind of appear in larger projects. So I think there's, it's not like you can just give up on AAA and think, well, there's never going to be anything new. It's just that you do have to look to indie games to see what's going to be next, I think, generally speaking.
The last AAA game I think that kind of was different for me that I still actually enjoy playing now is Shadow of Mordor, with the Nemesis system and the different sort of orcs. I don't know if you ever played it, but I'm a bit of a Tolkien nerd, obviously. But yeah, so that was the last sort of AAA game that I played that I was like, you know what, this is really, like, I found immersive and I wanted to play more of it. And I could play it for a long time.
Yeah,
but anyway.
because they tried something different. Yeah, it's really rare, and it's great when it happens.
And now they're releasing more of Mordor, which I'm keen to check out, but I'm wondering now whether it's just going to be a reskinned, better graphics Shadow of Mordor.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't fall into the same spell as like Call of Duty and the kind of like the Battlefield ones. I think Battlefield was okay, but the Modern Warfare where they just reskinned everything and then just added another number to the end of it.
Add an extra lens flare.
Yeah. You pay extra $5 for a new skin.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, those pay systems are insane for some of them. But yeah,
I have to make a confession though. I actually don't own a console, so yeah, like it is a bit funny that as you do get the impression that you're kind of missing out on half of the culture of what's going on.
Yeah.
Especially if you're on Twitter, because there is a kind of a console culture going way back, especially with Nintendo and Zelda and people who are fans of Final Fantasy, and I'm just like, what? I don't know. I don't understand. But I would probably want to address that in the future if I ever do get the time. It's just all the money.
Yeah, that's it. The funds and the time and money to cross-platform your game as well. But yeah, PC Master Race, you could just emulate everything.
That's right.
I've really just recently joined the Church of the PC Master Race like a year ago. And to be honest, I haven't looked back. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, console gamers. I've been converted. I mean, I've got my Xbox in there and I still play on it, but especially I bought a new TV today as well, which I'm pretty stoked about.
Yeah, if you've got a nice TV and a nice couch, for the last, actually, when I started making Innkeep, I wasn't in Australia. I was over in Tokyo, and you don't have space for TVs or couches over there. So another restriction was that I was working on a very cheap, lightweight laptop. So it's not just that I'm making a game for PC. I'm making a game that can be played on pretty much any hunk of junk. And that for me is probably something that's always been a part of my background as a gamer too. I've never been the guy with the kind of the computer, the LED lights and like
stuff,
super cool laser flashy mouse and all the rest of it. I've always played simple games. Yeah, so that's something that I think I've carried on with me in a way, definitely.
Yeah, those kind of flashy lights and stuff. I've had that. My brother's had that. We've always turned them off after a few weeks. It's just the novelty wears out.
It's a bit like it's kind of showing off the bling at the LAN party or something. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, LAN parties.
Well, they don't exist anymore, really, either, do they? Well, they do, but they're not as.
Yeah, I actually I know a few people here in Perth, and we do get together once or twice a year for old time's sake.
Nice.
Got a garage. Someone has a garage that we all get together at, and it is a fun thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember like playing games or heading over to some friends' houses, and one PC there. We'd always just gather around and cheer them on or spectate. It's I don't know. It's unique. A really cool experience just having friends around you, interested in the same thing, watching you. So yeah, LAN parties, got to bring them back.
Yeah, that's right. And that's another part of the rural experience. I think is that even when people started to play multiplayer online, if you were in the countryside with really slow internet, you couldn't. So the only solution was to get your rig, slap it in the car, and drive across to another town somewhere to get together and play games with your mates.
So much better with a few people.
Interesting. So how long were you in Tokyo for, mate?
I was in Tokyo for about 2 years. I was actually working in an animation studio.
Oh, nice.
And that was probably one of the things that maybe tipped me over the edge too, was just seeing people working on games, working on, there was a guy sitting next to me at one point making one of the characters for the fighting, what was it? Not Fighting Fantasy, sorry, that's the Ian Livingstone book. Super Street Fighter 5.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was just I'd look over my shoulder and there was a guy making Rashid. And making Cammy and making all the rest of them, and it was like, whoa, this is actually just a thing that people turn up to the office and they're just doing it. And that was kind of a bit of a nudge maybe from that too. Yeah.
So we didn't really ask you of your profession before you started all this game with dev work, Daniel. What did you used to do? Animation, obviously.
Oh, actually, I wasn't even animating. I wasn't working directly in the industry. I was a translator-interpreter.
Oh.
Yeah, my background's humanities, and I am still a student full-time. So Innkeep for me is purely like a part-time thing, which is why, I kind of take a very long-term view that it's a kind of like a 5-year project or something like that. And in the meantime, I just carry on with my research, working on a PhD at the moment, doing things in the humanities that are kind of related to Asian studies and philosophy. But yeah, in my free time, whenever I do get a bit of a bit of a few weeks or a few months where I've got a bit more time, I love to jump in and do some development. It's just a kind of a way to connect, I guess, to my roots and have a good time. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Like, we've interviewed quite a few people, and most of them had like backgrounds in animation, graphics design, IT kind of stuff, and
Yeah. Well, I did start out, and this is a funny thing. I started out making choose your own adventures, probably in primary school. I used to make my own rules for Heroes Quest, so I was really into board games. I made my own board games, and I was just always playing board games with my mates. And then once kind of PCs became a thing and I actually convinced my parents to buy one, the next thing I wanted to be after an author was a game maker. So going back 15 years ago, I was saying, look, I'm going to make games. That's what I'm going to do. But then you get a bit older, and unfortunately there was a period there where you still had to really be a programmer in order to do it. It wasn't as accessible as it is now with tools like Game Maker or Unity. You did have to jump in and learn C. And that was probably just one barrier too much for me because I always did like reading, so I ended up going more the humanities route rather than science. Yeah. But the funny thing is, you do tend to sometimes yo-yo back to your original interest.
Yeah, it's very cool how technology's allowed a lot of people just to hop on, drag and drop stuff, and make some really nice projects and games.
That's
and
right.
Yeah. How are you finding Game Maker?
I love it. I actually first started programming with Quick Basic back in the 90s, and I did make some simple kind of little choose your own text adventure games. And I always enjoyed doing that because it was so accessible. You did have to program, but you didn't have to learn this huge vocabulary of syntax. It was very forgiving. And Game Maker's like that. You can jump in there and do programming. And indeed, if you want to make a proper game, you have to learn to program. But the way that you do it is in a very kind of a measured, gradual process. So you've got your objects created as actual objects there. You can jump inside and start to manipulate and attach sprites to. So it gives you that kind of whole project setup that's really approachable. And you can make stuff in it that looks really fantastic. You just have to kind of give it some time and figure out what's possible. So I would definitely recommend it for anybody who's interested in working in 2D. I can't really speak for 3D, although I have seen people work doing 3D work in it. But yeah, for 2D, certainly.
That's our website actually has a show reel from I think the 2016 highlights of Game Maker, like all the games that were made, and like just looking at the games there, it's just amazing that it could be made from that kind of software.
Well, Hotline Miami, I think as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was
coming up. Actually, Tom Francis, who I mentioned earlier, has another game coming out called Heat Signature, and this is a game where you fly through a giant procedurally generated galaxy and you enter spaceships. So it's kind of a top down, like the old Grand Theft Auto 1 or something like that, but you're in spaceships, which it looks amazing. This is done in Game Maker as well.
I actually saw something on Twitter the other day, and someone was it was like Screenshot Saturday or something like that, and they were showing their top-down sort of game, and it looked, really similar to Grand Theft Auto, the first one. Sorry, you just reminded me of it then when you mentioned it. Man, I love it.
It's that there's something, isn't there? There's something about that kind of top-down style that really is kind of engrossing.
Yeah, it's just it's a different perspective, and especially if you couple that with like procedurally generated levels or games or even cityscapes, it's just it's like a new experience every time.
I think 2D really has just so much possibilities in it. It's a shame sometimes not to run down platformers because I love platformers, but there's so much more you can do with 2D than do platformers. So I'm really looking forward to over the next 10, 20 years that people keep exploring the space of what you can do in 2D. It is just so versatile. It kind of, in a way, you can do things in 2D that you simply can't in 3D. You can get away with things. You can present things in certain ways that in 3D you just can't.
Yeah, and you kind of, I think if you want to go into the 3D realm, you've got to kind of be really good at generating assets as well. Whereas I think you still have to in 2D, but I think the scrutiny applied to 3D is a lot higher. And you can't really get away with maybe some of the things you can in 2D.
Yeah, definitely. Because you can walk around and see the other side of things. if there's nothing,
exactly.
if there's nothing there, that's a problem.
I just find it amazing how we have that resurgence of like 2D or very simplistic games, and we're in an age where a lot of people are trying to dabble in virtual reality and augmented reality and stuff like that. It just shows, like you were saying, Daniel, the tenacity of 2D games. There's still a lot more it can offer.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's like comics, I mean, comics didn't go away because people started to play, watch movies or play games or do something else. They're still there because there's something about that form that allows a particular kind of expression. So, far from now, at some point when I finally finish this project and I move on to another one, I definitely don't see myself kind of graduating from 2D or something in a way. I'd always want to work in 2D for myself.
Yeah, there's always something that sticks close to home, I think, with 2D, because we've all grown up with it, playing games with that kind of aspect. So,
well, can I just make, if anyone who's listening to this who is thinking of developing their own game, the number one reason why I think you should consider working in 2D is because as an indie dev, you really need to make an identifiable style. I think it's important that people look at your game and it doesn't look like anything they've seen before. There's something about it, just with a look in it, 1 second, which is all anyone's going to look at your game for initially. There's something about it that looks different. And if you're working in 3D, that's pretty hard to pull off, I think. It's really quite tricky because there is a certain perspective. There's a certain kind of look where when you're working in 3D, you're going to have to really struggle to kind of overcome. Whereas in 2D, it's almost, you can make something that looks unique almost without trying, just by happy accident. Whereas 3D, that's going to be a lot more difficult. So I would recommend it on that basis as well, yeah.
Yeah, it's special. Too much complexity with 3D stuff as well. And that's a very good point about the 1 second rule. Like, people would just glance at images or pictures.
I mean, I don't want to run 3D down because I love there's some 3D indie games as well made in Unity, which are just fantastic. And you could only do them in 3D as well. Like, they're games that had to be in 3D because of the type of game they are. But if you're considering it, you're on the fence, and you want to play around a bit, I would say try in 2D and see what you can come up with, because it is much easier, I think, to make something that looks really unique and different.
Yeah, you were saying that you're really into your books there, Daniel, and judging by the stuff that you played and the design and style of Innkeep, have you been reading a lot of those fantasy books, either by Brandon Sanderson or even like the Forgotten Realms kind of style books and stuff?
I did read Sanderson. He finished Wheel of Time, didn't he? He was the guy they hired to jump in there when Robert Jordan finally kicked the bucket before finishing his series, as we all knew that he would.
Yes. Come on, George R. Martin, that guy.
Yeah. So I did read that. I used to read Wheel of Time, and I used to read Pratchett a lot. Really sad that he left, unfortunately, left us here. But
legitimately,
what a way to go with the steamrolling of his hard drive the other day. I used to read, of course, Lord of the Rings. My father read Lord of the Rings to me when I was a kid, and still too young to read, and then I read it myself, and The Hobbit, and all of the rest of it. So I was pretty stereotypical, I guess, in a way, growing up reading this stuff. And that had a big impact. Then, you had Games Workshop kind of kidding it big, and all of that kind of the artistic style of those worlds which were depicted was just, for a 12-year-old's mind, you just kind of like, you look at a goblin or an orc and you think that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like it's quite weird now. Like, I don't know if you guys have been to I won't mention, if you live in Perth, there's a certain store that's in the CBD that you have to go down some stairs into a basement to enter. Like, it's in an actual basement. And you can purchase all the various miniatures and things in there. And it's quite an amazing world now as an adult to go down and kind of peer about it and see what fantasy nerds get up to. But that was me for a long time. It was just so engrossing, just so amazing to kind of see what the imagination could come up with, just building on Tolkien's kind of world. So yeah.
Yeah, it never leaves you. It never leaves you. I've still been reading fantasy books. I've still been painting miniatures. I think the last one I was painted was like a couple of years though. But
yeah, look, I mean, I've still got somewhere. I've got some of my old miniatures and some of my old Hero Quest gear and all of that. And I think in a way, when you're an adult, you can appreciate it on another level as well. You know, you go back to it and you're like, wow, like you really appreciate the craft that went into making some of this stuff, for example.
Yeah. You're a kid, you just think it looks real cool.
Yeah, that's right. As an adult, you might look and say, wow, how'd they draw that? Like, how did they achieve this look? You know?
Yeah, definitely.
So, with you developing it hasn't been released. I like how you're currently promoting the game as well, like with your tweets and you're marketing already, which is what Glenn and I have been talking about with a couple of these previous interviews. It's an important step to do with any project that you have. Your Twitter, you've got your website, you've even got stuff on IndieDB, which is a fantastic. Fantastic forum just for getting feedback and seeing what else other people have as well, which is similar to what you were talking about with the Bay 12. That's right, yeah. Yeah, so do you find that you have, with regards to time and doing that as well, I guess the amount of effort that you put into your tweets and whatnot, do you find that it sucks up a lot of time, or is that something that you do every day? Yeah, it can take time. Like recently, you saw I wrote a big old post about what type of game I was trying to make, and I tried to really think it through a little bit about the underlying ideals that I had as a developer. And that took a couple of days to write up, and a couple of days is a lot of time if you've got a job and you've got a thesis you're supposed to be writing, and so that can take time.
Sounds like procrastination to me.
Yeah, it's like, well, you've got other things you're probably supposed to be doing, but it gives back more than it takes. I find, at least because I don't take it too seriously at this stage. I don't have. I mean, some people have mortgages, they've got kids, and indie development is actually their job. So I think that would bring a lot more stress into it when you're posting things and people aren't, rapturously retweeting everything you're saying and lapping up every word. You post things and for the longest time people just ignore you. So when I started out, I started tweeting from day one, and I started with my little YouTube development diaries from day one, not because I wanted to get on the marketing train as early as possible, but because I saw it. I'd always been a person who followed other people making games, so that was part of the process for me. Like, making a game for me was something that I wanted to share right from the start, just so that I could kind of be part of that scene and talk to other people. So yeah, it was always something that would let me enjoy the process more than if I just worked on it quietly by myself, and then one day, here's a game, guys. What do you think? I think that would be much more stressful. Yeah.
I think it's an opportunity to get feedback as well. Like a few times I've seen posts on Twitter and things like that. People are like, what do you think of this, this sprite? Yeah. And people will actually be like, well, have you thought of doing this? Or maybe you should tone this down or increase this. And I think it's a good way to get that feedback from people in the same shoes.
Definitely. It's, especially as you've got, like you said, people who are also developers who are looking at things. And I think, in a way, it gives you a sense that you're making some progress too, because you can look back at your old photos. When you're making videos, when you're taking screenshots, you're leaving a record of where you've been. And one of the best ways to kind of overcome that feeling of being terrible is to look at how terrible you used to be by comparison to now.
I was going to ask you about that. That's awesome. Yeah.
So, I make something, I think, well, that looks pretty terrible. But then I look at something I made 2 years ago. It's like, wow, that was really. So at least you feel slightly better.
They are awesome reminders. Those kind of record keeping. I had a few books because I used to dabble in a bit of drawing and illustration and stuff like that. And just looking at yourself get better and like the progression that you've made. Yeah, it's a good motivator, and it's good to keep you chugging along.
That's right. So even day one with my first little dev diaries, when I made them, I kind of thought, I'm making this so that I can look at it in 2 or 3 years and kind of laugh and feel better about, how it's going and just have that reference point. Yeah.
So talking about looking back, how far away do you think you are from some sort of finished alpha or beta?
Yes.
Yeah. It's tough, isn't it? Because, as you kind of work on something and you start to invest more time into it, you start to care more about it being as good as it can be. So when I first started out, I thought, you just kind of jump in there and bang something out, and 6 months later you've got like a game loop. And now I start to think that 6 months is no time at all to do anything.
Yeah.
So then you start to get really positive feedback from certain people, and you start to get certain opportunities that make you rethink how far you want to go with it. So yeah, basically it might be a few more years just to get to a stage where I'm seriously beta testing. Because I'm going to be working on maybe bringing it to a higher level than I originally thought.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have a feeling that the core loop will be in maybe by the end of the year. So that's something that I'm kind of just going over a hill at the moment with returning to the functionality that I had with my prototype. And once I finally got to that kind of point where my game is where it was before I ripped up everything and started again with prettier graphics and extra rooms and everything, and I'm actually working on that core loop, which I've already kind of planned out ahead of time, it might be that progress goes really quick. It's just one of those things you don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think, like you said before, it depends on time frame and other things in your life as well.
Yeah. That's it. So my partner and I, maybe we'll have a little kid or two, and I'll have to go and work somewhere, and we'll be worrying about a mortgage and all the rest of it. So you just can't really say. Then I've got a PhD to write as well. But I hope that if people are watching, it's about the journey. So if people are watching and they can see stuff happening, I don't think it really matters if it takes another 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. It might be that some people who really want to play it, they're like, oh, come on already, just give us something. But I think most people are happy just to watch the thing develop and grow. That's kind of its own joy,
And it's not as if you're in this to make millions. You know what I mean? That's the other thing we talk to people about. It's not about, if you're coming into game dev thinking you're going to make money, there's way better ways to make money than making games.
Yeah, that's right. So I probably kind of think of it sometimes as thinking, look, if I finish it, and then looking back, I kind of split up how many hours I put into it versus how much I made in the end. Maybe I'm working for $1 an hour. I don't know. maybe it's less, but you really can't kind of, like you say, you can't take it as a job until you've probably sold your first game. Then you might have some idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to take your time with these things, especially if you're super passionate with it as well. I know the developer for Stardew Valley, I think he was an indie dev, and he took a few years to finish off. He had that vision, and he did what he wanted. He waited.
He was working, I think, 10-hour days in the final year, and then apparently after it released, he was working 15 hours a day.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Actually, just chatting to yourself, Daniel, and looking at your inspirations for game deving and why you do it, and talking about Innkeep, which I'm actually pretty excited to play, no matter how long it takes.
I am excited as well.
Cool. Look, I'm really. I got to say, like, one of the things that when I was thinking about what game to make, and I had some requirements, I had to make a game that I would want to play. Like, that was one of the major things that I thought, what is a game that I really want to play? So it's funny to be in a spot where you want to play your own game. I don't know if I'll feel that way when it finally comes out, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to it as well.
As long as you keep updating us with the progress of it, and we can see it's still getting worked on. I've been waiting for a few of these books to come out, like these trilogies from well-known authors, and some of them have taken 5 years with no news, and I'm just like, give us the next book.
I think when you watch people like, for example, Papers, Please, developer has been working on a fantastic looking game now for about 3.5 years. And he'll just go silent for 5 months, and then he'll post like a single GIF or something. Oh yeah, right. And it's kind of like one day there'll be an unexpected Christmas, and it'll just arrive.
Good surprise. It's a good. Cool. I think that's it, Glenn. Did you have anything else you want to ask? Or?
No, I mean, thanks for taking the time to chat to us, mate. Yeah, and I mean, we do this because we want to hear the stories of other game devs in Australia, and talk to people and listen to their experiences, and hopefully share some knowledge that everyone's sort of accumulated. And
thanks a lot too, guys. It's really nice to have the opportunity just to talk about your work with people.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, if you're a big AAA game, you get a fair bit of coverage and people talking to you about it, and I think
Yeah.
it's good to talk to the little guys per se, and we're pretty excited. We're off to PAX.
That's fantastic.
Oh,
I wish I could go. That's amazing.
Wow, yeah. We're really excited. Yeah, it should be so good. The flights are going to kill us, but in terms of, but I'm really excited to go see the indie sort of section they have there, and we're hoping to try and record some small interviews and stuff with people there, and of course go see some of the big shows as well. But
Well, there's also, don't forget, there is our little local Perth once per year development conference.
Is that in October?
In the town hall, I think it's about October.
Yeah, I missed last year because I had to work, but I really want to try and get there this year. And apparently, I did get a chance to visit last year, and it's pretty cool. So if anybody has been, definitely put it on your calendar. Yeah, I mean, I think Kate Rains Goldie does a lot of stuff, and I think she's pretty heavily involved in that sort of stuff. And the other guys who work with her, there's a whole bunch of them. I mean, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's really nice to see what people are working on as well, and actually get a chance to talk to them face to face too.
Have you been to any of the Play Up Perth events at all?
Just this one really. Last year, that was it for me. Because I've only been in Perth for the last year. Before that, I was still in Tokyo. But I would like to. Yeah, I would like to keep going in the future as I start to have something that's kind of like a demo that people can play as well. Then I'd like to tour around a little bit and get people sitting on it and tinkering with it and see what they think. Yeah. Because
there's the Play Up Perth events, I think once a month in the Nostalgia Box in the city there. And people, you can sort of you just email them and say, I want people to play test my game, and you can go, and it's like $10 admission fee, and people have a few beers and play test the game. It's a really cool environment. I've been to a few.
That sounds like something to be really helpful when you do have something playable. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Well, thanks a lot, Eric. Thanks a lot, Glenn. It's been really nice talking with you.
Yeah, it's been really good.
Thanks,
Thank
Daniel.
you. And good luck with Innkeep.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and another big thank you to Daniel for coming on the show and having a chat with us. If you want to get in contact with Daniel, he's got a Twitter account at Daniel O. Burke. We'll link that in the show notes as well on our website, AussieDevs.com. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.